Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, let's talk some boxing. So I want to make a difference. I want to differentiate, between sensational boxers and complete boxers or complete fighters. There's a big difference between the two. Let's talk about a couple sensational fighters first of all. Mike Tyson. When it comes to being sensational, Mike Tyson is that kind of fighter. Mike Tyson fought, at least early in his career, a certain level of opposition. His key factor to deterring his opposition and conquering them was his intimidation. The fact that he was very intimidating. He had good technique, bob and weave style, and he would come in and then he would seek to destroy his opposition, so his intentions would be felt. Another person such with that nature was George Foreman. Now, against higher level opposition, when he fought against Evander Holyfield and also Lennox Lewis, those tactics and those strategies and those antics didn't work inside the ring. He was beaten by both opponents twice. Now, why is this important? Because there is a difference between being a complete fighter, which Mike Tyson was not, and being a sensational fighter. Mike Tyson had a pretty good bob and weave style. However, he could not avoid the jab. For someone who knew how to throw a jab properly. And also, his kryptonite was when he could not intimidate his opponent. He could not intimidate Evander Holyfield, and he couldn't intimidate Lennox Lewis. And once they applied their techniques to Mike Tyson, techniques of holding, jabbing, and setting traps for him, he was easily beaten. Another sensational fighter was Kevin Kelly. He was a very good fighter, and Kevin Kelly is known for dominating some of the lower weight divisions. But when he fought a relatively technically sound Mexican fighter, he was beaten in that fight. Also faced Prince Nassim Hamed a little later on, who was not a technically sound fighter. Two other very sensational fighters in history, very entertaining, were Sugar Ray Leonard and Roy Jones Jr. Now, these fighters are highly entertaining fighters. Sugar Ray Leonard in the ring with Roy Jones Jr. would do the chicken scratch or the bolo punch, and these all excited everyone, and also these guys would get knockouts. However, once again, were they complete fighters? I'm going to say this. If you look at James Toney and Mike McCollum, those are two complete fighters. They have the defense, they have the offense. They know when to throw a punch, how, when combinations work, what's the most effective punch to throw without getting a return punch that would harm you. When you look at these fighters, Floyd Mayweather's another one, Pernell Whitaker's another one. Those are complete fighters. They are boxers. Sugar Ray Leonard was known for his flurries, his antics, the bolo punch, chicken scratch, just like Roy Jones Jr., and his quickness. But in terms of his defense, Sugar Ray Leonard squared up too much, and he was not able to avoid punches in return, especially body punches and then head punches. Same thing with Roy Jones Jr. This is why Antonio Tarver, with a greater, longer reach, was able to break him down and then stop him both times. Major reason was because while Leonard and Roy Jones Jr. can set traps for their opponents, and they're exceptional athletes, defensively they have holes and they're flawed. Mike McCollum, you weren't going to ever knock him out or stop him because of the technique that he used. A technique that you'll see Floyd Mayweather using. Mike McCollum knew how to use the shoulder roll properly in his defensive strategy. It was not the only thing he used. And because of that, Roy Jones Jr. could not stop Mike McCollum. An old, really old Mike McCollum was handling Roy Jones Jr. It wasn't a competitive fight, but Roy couldn't stop him. And there was no way he could, because the defense of Mark McCollum was just too good. Now, why am I speaking about complete fighters? Complete fighters don't necessarily, they're not the most entertaining fighters. In boxing, it's about entertainment. It's about being sensational. Paul Williams, sensational fighter. He'd give you knockouts. He'd give you activity all the way through a fight. But not the most technically sound. Manny Pacquiao, exciting, non-stop activity, throws a lot of punches. Just extremely exciting to watch, but not the most technically sound fighter in the game. Muhammad Ali, fantastic fighter, used technique, one-of-a-kind heavyweight who was light on his feet, very agile, very quick, could talk the talk, walk the walk, predicted fights, highly entertaining, the man who originated the chicken scratch and the bolo punch. In spite of all of that, he's not the most complete fighter. Muhammad Ali would not go to the body. He usually headhunted heavyweights. He did feint to the body and then go to the head, but not the most complete fighter in the world. He used distance mostly in his defensive maneuvers, but he didn't use blocking as part of his defensive maneuvers. Not very often. Sensational, technically sound like some of the other fighters, but not the most complete fighter out there. However, Bernard Hopkins is a complete fighter. Andre Ward is a complete fighter. So there is a difference between being sensational and being complete. Guillermo Rigondeaux is he's close to being a complete fighter. Guillermo cannot really fight on the inside, however, so that's the only difference. But Andre Ward, Floyd Mayweather, Bernard Hopkins, Mike McCollum, James Toney, these guys can fight any distance away from their opponent, on the outside, mid-range, or inside. They can defensively maneuver away from their opponent, or Pernell Whitaker is another one. Offensively, they're pretty good offensively as well. They're complete fighters. So there's a difference between being sensational and being a complete fighter. This is important for you to remember when you talk about the great. Sugar Ray Robinson was another complete fighter. It's not just about throwing combinations, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just about getting knockouts. It's also about hit or not get hit. So when we talk boxing, remember, this is boxing. This is not MMA. This is not brawling. When we're talking boxing, we're talking about hit and not get hit. And complete fighters take that principle and make it a very stylish, bold statement. Sensational fighters are highly entertaining, and you want to see them again because of the spectacular nature in which they do things. If you can get someone who's both sensational and a complete fighter, then you really have something special.